It is Sunday, and that means it's time for Politics Unplugged. Ann Trujillo is on assignment this week. I'm Tony Kovaleski, and it has been another interesting and politically charged week at the state capitol. A little verbal sparring and, of course, attacks from one side of the aisle to the other. Questions about partisan politics clearly on the rise under the Golden Dome, with Democrats in charge of both sides of the legislature as well as the governor's office during this session. The Dems have more than enough support to pass controversial bills. So what's that mean? Well, on the other side of the aisle, some now thinking Republicans are trying to apply the brakes to slow down the process.
Basically slowing everything down to a crawl and creating sort of an embarrassment for the institution of the democratic process.
Slowing it down is a healthy thing, it's a positive thing, and sadly we haven't used it as much as we should use it up here.
Now, Governor Jared Polis is also weighing in on this issue this week. He says he's not concerned about Washington-style politics at Colorado's capital.
I think there's a lot of good ideas on both sides of the aisle, and when the legislative process works well, and I'm confident it will this session, we'll take some of those great ideas from both sides to produce a better outcome for Coloradans.
So clearly lots to talk about this week. Blair Miller of DenverChannel.com is one of our Capitol insiders, keeping a close eye on everything going on at the Capitol. Blair, so much to talk about, but let's begin by talking about this oil and gas overhaul and the politically charged atmosphere. What's your take on where we are right now? Certainly voting decisions that came in late in the week.
Right, so we saw towards the end of the week there, we saw the bill pass again. It's going to have to go back to the other chamber for concurrence with the amendments, but we saw 4 Democrats vote against it. And now we're seeing the group that supported Proposition 112, Colorado Rising, saying that they disagree with some of the amendments in there, saying that they believe that they're creating some loopholes in there, and especially with mineral rights, and also sort of the definition of some of these local control issues in there. So I think that was what some of these Democrats kind of, you know, they went against their own party, but it was safe enough to still pass the House.
Well, and it's interesting here because many are saying this is the most sweeping oil and gas reform in state history. It comes in the shadow of the November election when voters said they didn't want this reform. For people at home, help them understand what's the difference between what they looked at and voted on in November and what lawmakers are now likely to pass, what the governor said he will sign, and that opens up other doors. But what are the differences?
So, I mean, I think that's what has been, the waters have been muddied here, because I think that the people who are involved in the political interest side of these things have tried to muddy the waters and say there's no difference here, but there is a difference. Proposition 112 had, you know, specific setbacks for all of the state. This bill is more of a local control issue, and what that means is that after this bill passes, should it pass, you know, Senate is likely to probably agree with those amendments, but should it pass, then it's going to put the control in the hands of, you know, your city or your county, your local jurisdiction to decide if they do want to implement setback issues, if they want to, you know, implement some of these changes that had been in those bills, but there's not a specific, you know, 2,500 rules or foot setback rule in there. Clearly
politically charged or politically unplugged, if you will. We've been told by inside sources that if it does pass, if it does get signed by the governor, like everybody's anticipating right now, oil and gas is going to continue to spend a lot of money and fight this, so it may not be over at the Capitol. But let's move to the next most critical, most politically charged issue that came before the legislature this week. That's the red flag bill. Right. This is a bill, let's talk about it, that came forward in the last session, didn't pass, and both sides fighting over it then. Now it looks like it will pass. A bill to basically take weapons away from those that may not be or may be a risk to themselves or others deemed by law enforcement.
Right, and that's the key issue here. I think, you know, now that Democrats do have control, you know, we saw Senate President Leroy Garcia, he voted against the measure, but it still had, you know, one vote clearance there in the Senate, and it passed with 13 votes in the House. So I think when it goes back to the House now for them to agree, I think it will pass, and the governor said he's going to sign it. But yeah, so, you know, we've seen all of these counties, these sheriff's offices say that, you know, we're not going to enforce this. This is unconstitutional.
It's been interesting because law enforcement really is not united. Some sheriff's departments, others saying they will, others won't. Police unions coming in and out. I mean, it has been controversial from last year, even more controversial this year. Why?
Right, and I think that the main reason why is because Republicans lost the Senate in 2016. I think that's the main reason why. You know, we saw George Brockler support last year's bill, and he's not supporting this year's.
Which is fascinating.
Yeah, and you know, last year he was running for election. This year he's not. But there are small changes to the bill this year. But then at the same time, you're seeing, you know, Douglas County Sheriff Tony Spurlock still vehemently, you know, supporting this bill. You see the state's top law enforcement officer, essentially Attorney General Phil Weiser, saying that these sheriffs, you know, they should resign if they do that. They have to follow the law. They don't just get to preempt what the law is if they so choose.
And that was a fascinating part of the week politically, when the Attorney General stepping in and sending a message, which was an aggressive message. So let's move to a third item we'd like to talk about. Our former governor, John Hickenlooper, out on the campaign trail. A pretty significant development for him. He's now a player. Explain.
Yeah, so he got 1% in a recent Quinnipiac poll of likely Democrat voters and possible Democratic voters.
Not a lot, but significant.
Significant because he's up from a dash or a star, which is basically not registering. And the 1% poll is basically what the DNC has said, this is what we need for you to qualify, because there are so many Democrats running. I mean, and with him qualifying there, that brings him to at least 13 that could theoretically qualify. Like Joe Biden hasn't announced he's running yet, but he's leading in the polls. But interesting with that 1%, you know, that puts him at the same level as Julian Castro. Cory Booker had 2% in that poll. Amy Klobuchar had 2%. So a blip on the radar, but with these many Democrats running, it's going to be really tough for him to make a bigger dent, I think.
Blair Miller, thanks for the insight on 3 critical topics. We're going to take a break here. We've got much more when we come back to Politics Unplugged.
Yeah, that went by pretty fast.